Live from the Clarity from Chaos studios, heard worldwide, it's Dave Campbell. On every episode, Dave and his guests explore, discuss, and work on solutions to some of life's biggest challenges. So, if you're ready, be prepared to be enlightened, amused, and even shocked by what you hear. And now, the real, the authentic, the one and only Dave Campbell.
Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Dave Campbell, and you are listening to Clarity from Chaos. If you're new to the show and you like what we're doing here, take a moment, go out to my website on Substack. The site address is https://clarityfromchaos.substack.com. There you can listen to the archived shows that I've done, see the upcoming guests, and if you like, support the show by clicking the subscribe button. Ladies and gentlemen, we stand on the precipice. Members of Congress are asking our military now to refuse unlawful orders without providing any kind of examples. A continuous rise in violent protests and a political system that is no more than kabuki theater. We have activist judges acting as president, and no one is holding anyone accountable for their actions. It's no wonder the electorate has lost their trust and patience with our system. Hope is disappearing. We need to stop thinking in terms of Democrat and Republican as adversaries, and we need to begin thinking more biblical. We need to bring the church and the Bible into our lives, and we need to defeat this threat spiritually, and we need to elect better representation, individuals who answer to a higher authority and not the puppet masters they answer to today. Our guest on this edition of Clarity is not a newcomer to battling the evil propaganda heaped upon us by the corporate media, our politicians, and social media. He is the founder, president, and CEO of Pickaxe, a groundbreaking social media platform, and the author of Following the Leader, Mr. Jeff Dornik. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me on. Been looking forward to chatting with you.
Before we get going on everything in your book, I'd like your thoughts on the rise of the DSA in this country, because I think since the Obama administration, I think it's been put on steroids. And I think everything that we're seeing, the rewriting of history, the rise of the whole term of racism, the attack on the church, the attack on the family, all of it's right out of the Marxist playbook, and it just seems like we're losing ground against it, Jeff.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's interesting because a few years ago I put together kind of like two back-to-back group project books. One was called Social Injustice, and the other one was called Church and State. And in Church and State, we were looking specifically at the strategy of infiltration by these cultural Marxists and leftists, but specifically into the evangelical church. And we looked at how they dove into the seminaries, how they hijacked that, and they're influencing people through conferences and celebrity worship and all that kind of stuff. It's really interesting because they're using the exact same tactics in every single sphere of influence, whether you're talking about education or you're talking about the church or you're talking about politics or political parties. And that's one of my concerns. And that's why I loved your opening monologue, was because it's not about Democrat versus Republican. This is about right versus wrong. This is about good versus evil. This is about God versus Satan. There's so many ways to put it, but it's not about Democrat versus Republican. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people think, like, oh, conservative liberal means Republican Democrat. It's like, well, no, that's not actually what that means. It's not what this fight is about. It's about truth and error. It's about right and wrong. It's about the future of humanity. And I'm really concerned with the trajectory that we're heading in, because it doesn't matter what political party you're looking at. It seems like they're both hurtling us over the cliff.
Yeah, and if anybody would disagree with that, I would offer up the explanation of, you had Elon Musk and his team come in and do the whole Doge thing at the beginning of the Trump campaign and uncover and show the waste and abuse and everything else that our government is today. And Congress as yet has codified any of that work, which tells me that they've got their hands in the same damn cookie jar that the Democrats. So there really is no difference other than reaching into the primordial pool and pulling out somebody and saying, you're a Democrat, and reaching your hand back into the same bucket and pulling out and say, you're a Republican, because there is no real differentiation if I'm looking at it right now. So it's really come down to being just binary, good and evil. And I think people, and it was so tragic with Charlie, I think Charlie's death, and that's Charlie Kirk for those who don't know what I'm talking about. I think Charlie's death may be the tipping point, or the start of the tipping point for the public to start understanding what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, because I think no matter which way you look at it, it feels like that moment that happened, there was a change in our country. That's when you began to see the Republican Party infighting in a way that we haven't had infighting before. It's when we started turning on each other, and I think a lot of it is because, when you think about it, like Charlie Kirk was one of those guys that was very unifying, and he would bring different people together with differing opinions and viewpoints. And okay, cool, we disagree. Let's debate. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss. Let's dive into this kind of thing. And then now all of a sudden you have all these people that, now that you don't have that unifying factor of somebody like Charlie Kirk, where it's just like now they're left to their own devices. There is nobody to unify anymore.
No.
And that's my big thing, especially, for me running a social media platform, and I'm trying to figure out, how do we get people to talk to each other again? How do we get people to disagree with each other again? And guess what? It's okay. It's okay to have differences of opinion. So like, and it's really interesting, because I've been trying to moderate a debate between specifically within Christian pastors about replacement theology versus Zionism. And because I can poke holes in both arguments, and I find agreement with both arguments in different ways. And so I'm like, okay, let's actually duke this out. I can't find anybody, and it's really weird, because this is more the side that I would find myself aligned with in general theologically and historically. I can't find any Zionist pastor that will actually come into a debate against the replacement theology guy, because they're like, oh, we don't want to give him credibility. We don't want to do that. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, the Apostle Paul would go into false idol temples and talk to false prophets and debate them and stuff. And you can't debate a guy over replacement theology. Like what is happening right now?
Right. You don't, and it's interesting. The church I go to, we have a couple of authors that are apologists that are extremely, extremely well versed, and they would enter any kind of discussion like that. But if you look across the spectrum, the broad spectrum of the church, they've all, COVID was successful on so many platforms for the propagandists, because they've got the entire country, and we're starting to awaken from that, but we're still very, very much across the board. People are afraid to voice their opinion for fear of being rejected, for being thrown out of the group and not picked for the next volleyball game. They're very afraid of that. I mean, the whole transgender thing was a very specific little clique where everybody could raise their hand and say, well, my child's going through gender therapy and all of this other stuff. Look at me, rah, 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 rah. And it is such a very, very small group. But, if somebody voiced an opinion that said, baloney, biology's biology. When that child is born, it's male or it's female, period. There is no biological debate, although COVID got and this whole transgender thing got all of the National Pediatric Society all up in arms. They couldn't even make a damn decision, for God's sake, right? And, I don't know about you, but when my daughter was born, I knew damn good and well that was my daughter, and so I think that's part of it, Jeff. I think people are just afraid to talk, because I think the propagandists have been so successful in squishing differences of opinion for fear of being canceled, for being an outcast. And they've made that, just like with being called a racist, they've made that stick pretty badly on people,
Yeah.
and I think that may be part of the problem, Jeff, is, people will not engage. You will never hear another, who was it, Buckley and Buckley debate like you would hear back when I was a kid and listening to like Firing Line or something like that. You will not hear that anymore,
Yeah.
ever. I don't
Well,
think.
so here's the thing, and I think it's even maybe a little bit even more sinister than
Well, it could be.
what
Yeah.
you laid out, because what's happening is there's been this push of what we call like identity politics, right?
hmm
But when you get down to the psychology of that, what's happened is that, the politicians, the powers that be, and this has now happened in virtually every sphere of influence, is they've gotten down to you and your identity. And that can apply to so many different levels. For me growing up, and I'm writing about this in my book Following the Leader, that still pre-ordering, so it's still coming down the pipeline. But I'm writing through this because, like, I found my identity growing up in one particular evangelical pastor. So it was about, what does this pastor say? And then everything that I thought about truth or the Bible or theology or belief or application or anything had to do with, what did that pastor say? And if somebody disagreed with that pastor, well, clearly they don't study the Bible as much as this pastor. And you begin to find your identity as, being a John MacArthurite or a John Piper person, or identify with this pastor or this pastor or this pastor. And this applies to politics. It applies to transgenderism. That's where what ends up happening is you try to have conversations with people, and if you challenge them, you're not just challenging their belief system. And this is where I think a lot of people really mess up in conversations. You're not just challenging their belief system, you're challenging their very identity. You're challenging who they are and who they view themselves as. So
Right.
this applies to the transgender debate. It applies to LGBTQ. It applies to Democrat and Republican today. It applies to MAGA. It applies to which political candidate are you supporting. If you disagree with them, then all of a sudden you are challenging their very reality, their identity. And that's a problem, where if you go back 50 years or 40 years into history and you look at it, there wasn't that same kind of identity that we have today, and to where people could debate and they could discuss, because when you disagreed with somebody, you weren't challenging their very reality. You were just challenging a difference of opinion. And we can't have those conversations, because anytime you disagree with somebody, you are challenging their identity. And if they admit that they're wrong and you're right, or vice versa, then what you're actually doing is you're getting them to have to admit that their entire reality was based on a lie. And that's why I think a lot of people are not willing to admit about all the craziness
Right.
about COVID, is because when you think about it, they gave up so much in COVID in order to protect people and slow the spread. And people lost businesses, they lost homes, they lost jobs, they lost family, they lost friends. The whole gamut when you think about it. And if we're coming in with the truth about COVID-19 and vaccines and all that, we're now challenging the fact that, look, for 3 or 4 years, they got jabbed, they were masked, they were social distancing, they didn't go to grandma's funeral, they didn't go to a wedding, they didn't spend time with family. Now everything that they sacrificed was for nothing. And so we have to get into that kind of mindset to understand why there's so much pushback when we come to them with the truth.
Oh yeah. No, I agree. And I think your point is well made. About 50 years ago, I think we had a much stronger sense of who we are,
Yep.
because that's what we got from our parents, right? And that particular paradigm has gone through, since the early 60s, has gone through, just gone downhill, right? Because ever since Betty Friedan decided that women didn't need to be at home anymore and raise children, and because that was horrible, and now, of course, fathers are ridiculed and made fun of every night on national television and everything else. So they've been very successful in destroying the male influence, and it's much to the detriment of the entire social fabric of our country, and
Yeah.
I think probably of the world, to just stretch it even further. It's not good, and
Yeah.
I struggle sometimes trying to understand how to start fixing it. I think things like what we're doing is part of that, but it's kind of like a grain of sand, if you will. It doesn't have a lot of impact unless there's a whole lot of it, right?
Yeah. Well, and this is where because I've been thinking a lot about that because I had a lot of conversations with a lot of my friends, and one of them, Mindy Robinson, she's a really good friend of mine. She's great, and it's funny, we go on each other's shows and we'll try to challenge each other on who can come up with the craziest conspiracy theory that we can prove is true, and try to blow each other's minds on that one. But it's interesting because she and I have had this conversation where it's like, okay, so we know the truth, and we can talk about it in our own little algorithmic bubbles of people that agree with us, and we're
Right.
preaching to the choir. How do we get the information to the masses? How do we get the information out of our algorithmic bubble? And she's like, do I have to rent an airplane and just drop flyers over Los Angeles and just that sort of, like, what do we have to do? And the thing that I keep telling everybody is, don't think about how do we get to the masses. Is if we could get a large group of conservative minded Christians, fill in the blank people that believe in the truth, go have actual legitimate conversations with the people in your circle, and don't shy away from those conversations. The one-on-one, that's where you're going to change minds. Probably not going to happen as much listening to podcasts. So when you're doing podcasts and conversations, that view those as equipping people in your own algorithmic camps in order to then go
Right.
send out into the world with the truth. But I've been able to change so many minds. And again, I live in communist California, and this is not to toot my own horn because it's not about me at all. But what I do is I don't shy away from conversations, and then I ask pointed questions, maybe drop a piece of like a fact or a truth or something like that. Ask a question to force them to rationalize their opinion based upon that information. And a perfect example is I got so many people, again, I'm in California, surrounded by lefties. Everybody around me was jabbed up, got COVID vaccines, like the whole deal. And what's interesting is like, literally they're like, well, Jeff, how could you not get vaccinated? How could you not do this? Well, I'm like, okay, well, can we pull up the FDA approval letter of the Comirnaty? Okay, yeah, this is the actual study here. I can show it to you right now, where they only tested it for 7 days after
Right.
injection, and you're
Right.
not even considered vaccinated until 14 days. So what actually happened here? And it also says that they kept track of how many people died over the course of the study, but they didn't include it in the results because they said it wasn't pertinent to the information. And then if you look at the numbers, and I'll pull up my calculator, here's the numbers. It didn't matter whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. You had a more than 99% chance of not getting COVID-19. So then it's like, okay, so now here's the facts. Now, what do we do with this information? How do you rationalize this based
Right.
upon these facts? And then I take a step back and I shut up and be quiet. And the one thing I learned doing sales for business is the first person who speaks loses. So you shut up, and you can see the wheels in their mind turning, and they're trying to figure out, how do I rationalize the fact that you're bad because you didn't get the jab when I'm faced with this information that's in the FDA approval letter? And if we can have more conversations like that, I think that we could actually begin to gain some traction. But it's not the glorious, attractive, big tent revivals, whatever. It's one-on-one conversations with people where you force people to rationalize their opinions.
Yeah, it's going to have to be, I think, Jeff, because they've done such a good job of concentrating the media and the whole propaganda mechanism. They've literally collapsed the media down where you have like 6 CEOs and a couple of hundred executives controlling everything that the consuming public hears, sees, reads, dreams about, listens to, whatever, by just a handful of people. You're literally controlling 350 million people, right?
Yep.
So, with that said, you can, and I've done this. I've literally laid the study you're talking about down on the table to have that conversation. Well, where did this come from? Well, I printed it right out of the government website. No, because people now have so much distrust that producing and bringing the truth and laying the truth down in front of them is almost a as much of a struggle as it is getting them to listen to it, because they automatically reject it. There's been so much, you know, the sky is falling crap that it's just like the climate change knuckleheads, right? It's finally gotten to the point where most people look at it like what it was to begin with, but they've gone through several decades of this crap, and they're not believing anything, right?
Yep.
So I think there's a twofold challenge. There's a challenge number one is just to get people to stop and to listen and not formulate a response until you're done talking. That's number one, because people have gotten to the point where there is no active listening anymore. There's active responses, but there is no active listening. People don't listen. And I think we can blame technology for that, because trying to decipher an email, whether it's a nasty email or a positive email, because somebody uses caps in their email response, you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
It's crazy with what people have been subjected to, and maybe it's unfair for me to sit here and think that they're unresponsive because they've been conditioned as such, right?
Yeah. Well, it's been a lifelong conditioning when you think about it. I mean, even the education system, system from preschool on up is trust the experts, trust your teacher, trust the textbook, and they're the experts. You don't question, you fall in line. If they tell you to do something, you say yes, ma'am, and you just do what they say. They're the ones that set the schedule. They're the ones that give you the rewards. They're the ones that give you guys the punishments. And it's basically training you to be an employee and or reliant upon the government. I think that specifically when it comes to having these kinds of conversations, because I think again, this is to me really our only opportunity to actually save this country is going to be on the much more personal, face-to-face kind of conversations,
right?
But I think the thing is that what we have to remember ourselves is the pressure isn't on us to quote unquote convince them. And I always liken this to evangelism within Christianity. Our job is not to save the lost. Our job is to share the gospel with them. Our job is to get the truth in front of them. And then the Holy Spirit may or may not open their hearts. The Holy Spirit, that's the Holy Spirit's job. My job is to get them the information. And then I obviously I'm going to try to do everything I can to compel them and bring them about and all that. But the pressure's off of me. And that's been the interesting thing. I've had a lot of people around me because I've been going really hardcore with all of this since 2020, when just like a lot of people, in the midst of COVID, it starts, you do podcasts, you do shows, you do everything. And they're like, how have you not burnt out? I have so many friends that have burnt out in this industry, and they're just getting tired and they're getting so frustrated. And it's like, I think the big difference though, is like, I'm like, I don't put pressure on myself. My job is just to get the truth out there, have interesting conversations, challenge the narratives, and all of that. And the pressure's off of me. Like there is zero pressure on you as an individual to save the country. What your job is just to do is to be obedient and to do the right thing and to share the truth and get that truth. You don't know. They may be very argumentative. And I've actually had a few people come to me afterwards where, it's very combative. And I'm like, they weren't even listening to the thing I said. They come back to me a month later and I was like, I was thinking about that one thing you said.
Exactly.
Like I've had that happen a few times where in the moment you feel like, what's the point? I should just give up with this conversation. I'm not getting anywhere, but you don't know what's going through their mind, and you don't know what kind of deprogramming that they're going through after your conversation when they're thinking about the after effects of it too.
No, absolutely. So let's talk about your book. It hasn't come out yet, right?
Correct.
So why don't you give us a lead into it of what you're doing with it?
Yeah, for sure. So it's interesting. So in the book Church and State, which is a group book project I put together a couple of years ago, the chapter that I wrote on that was on the evangelical cult of personality. And in that one, it's, how do these, mega church pastors and all of that basically manipulate you into being a follower of them? Obviously then you support them, you support their ministry, you give them all your money, like the whole deal. Okay. So they're basically kind of this little mini cult within evangelicalism. So I wrote a chapter on that. and then how the left was using that in order to kind of, push people away from, traditional conservative values into more Bernie Sanders AOC type rhetoric, even within like the Southern Baptist Convention and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so, there were certain, key, tactics that they would use in order to manipulate you and push certain propaganda and worldviews and all that. And then now being in politics and more this political commentary and all of that, I realized, well, it's all the same tactics that they're using in politics. And then it's all the same thing that happened across the board in every sphere of influence.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, so what's actually happening here? So I do a deep dive into the cults. You look at Jim Jones, Charles Manson, Scientology, fill in the blank, all the cults, they all use the same tactics. Cancel culture, massive in these cults, mind control, propaganda. How do they get you? And I always say too, it's like, how does, a cult like Scientology, right? How do they get you to believe that aliens drop into the Pacific Ocean, climb up the beach, and then indwell human beings in Los Angeles? And the reason why there's so many Scientologists in LA is because they're all dropping into the Pacific Ocean right there, and they're closest to the epicenter of where the aliens are dropping it. If you're evangelizing people off the street and you're like, well, there's aliens that are coming in off the Pacific Ocean right here, they're not going to believe you. How do they get you from being a normal everyday person off the street to buying into some bogus baloney like that? Well, think about what's happened with COVID. Think about what's happened with all these different kinds of things. It's this exact same tactics. How do they get normal people, everyday people, to believe the craziest, wildest things? Well, you start looking at this. They all use the same tactics. It's one little lie built on another little lie, built on another lie, built on another lie. And I'm looking at, okay, so how did we get from the cults doing this to the government doing this? Well, if you look at these cults, a lot of them had ties with intelligence agencies.
Well, I was going to say that the intelligence agency, the government's been doing this crap for years.
Yeah.
I mean, just go back to Ken Kesey and, the introduction of LSD with the Army and everything else.
Yep.
Everybody thought, oh, well, somebody came up with this in a little lab someplace in Mexico. No.
Yep.
No. This was built by the government, administered by the government, so on and so forth. And, it's funny you're talking about this because I've introduced people to a gentleman by the name of Edward Bernays, who was basically the father of public relations. And he's the one that basically got women to smoke and just countless other things. But on top of all of that, he was the individual that Goebbels used, read, and brought the German people along with Hitler for the Second World War. So when you're talking about this, these individuals have all been part of the Edward Bernays, who I think was the nephew of Freud, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They've all subscribed to that book, and that manner of manipulation, and have taken it to a much more sophisticated level than he did back in the 30s, right? So this whole concept has been a long time in the making, right? They've been proofing this thing for quite some time, right? Yeah. I think COVID was just a staging ground to see where they were at currently with, how well they could get people to walk off the end of the pier. And they did a damn good job of it, right? So
well, and I think though too is that like what I was talking about before about like your identity. I think that like that's a big part of like the cults, is that your identity is with that cult. And I think that the same thing is happening, in politics and in culture and in society right now, to where when you think about it, people are changing their belief system to align with their identity, to align with their political party, or align with their group or political movement or things like that. And that's what's concerning, is that, like, it's interesting because I've been doing a lot of interviews lately about an op-ed that I wrote about Elon Musk, and every time they'll introduce, and they may or may not have read the op-ed, so you never know how much they actually did background research, but literally Elon Musk just a couple weeks ago said that he's using capitalism in order to use Tesla and so AI and Optimus robots and the whole deal, in order to usher in his words, not my words, paraphrasing his words, a communist utopia. like in his words. And you're just sitting here and you're like, is nobody going to freak out about this kind of thing? And every single time, a host will introduce me, they're like, Elon Musk, he's, champion for free speech and all that. I don't agree with everything, whatever. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, did you not hear him? Like, communist utopia, his words, that's what he's trying to usher in. And nobody's like freaking out over that kind of stuff. And he's getting government contracts and he's close with the Trump administration, but because he's considered one of ours, then all of a sudden it's like, well, we don't
Right.
fight him, but we got to fight Bernie Sanders. It's like, no, like this is a major issue, but because of the identity side of things and how people have allegiance to him because they feel like he saved our democracy by, aligning with Trump and buying Twitter and all that kind of stuff. All of a sudden it's like, okay, well, we can't critique him too hard. It's like, no, he's literally talking about taking away the entire purpose of being a human being, making it to where nobody is going to have a job in the future. And his words, we're going to live in a communist utopia. Like, that should freak everybody out.
Yeah, it should absolutely. So here's a good one. How do we shift the paradigm, Jeff?
Well, that honestly, that's one of the things I'm trying to do through Pickaxe, which is my social media platform. Is
Right.
and a lot of that too is that there's a lot of alternative social media platforms that are out there. They're almost all hardcore conservative, MAGA, Trump world, the whole deal. I'm really targeting the center left to center right crowd, where we can actually have nuanced conversations and kind of push each other and challenge each other, and it's kind of worked out because a lot of the people that are attracted to it are the ones that do like more long form content and like to have conversations and enjoy disagreeing with each other and all of that. And so that's one of the things that it's basically kind of my life's mission now, is to foster these kinds of conversations. And I think
Right.
that the way that we fix this country is not through Washington, D.C. It's not through our elected officials. It's not through big conservative think tanks and all. It's by we the people. And it's not always going to be by you aligning with people that are 100% in agreement with you. It's going to be with people where you have a commonality of, let's say, the American values and the foundation of this country. I can disagree with you on all sorts of political issues, theological issues, and all that. But if we can agree that our founding fathers established this country with one theological presupposition, which is that you are created in the image of God. And because you're created in the image of God, you have certain inalienable rights that are God-given, that cannot be taken away by the government. And those are enshrined in our Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all that. If we can agree on that, we can disagree on a whole host of other things.
Yeah.
But if we can agree on that, and we stick to those principles, that is how we save this country, because both Democrats and Republicans are off the rails when it comes to, those foundational values.
Yeah,
and so
I agree.
If we can bring our country back together, it's going to be through conversations. It's going to be by local communities. It's going to be not through the traditional media route, which I think is what everybody still tries to do. And I'm like, you guys are banging your head against the wall. You're not going to get anywhere.
No, you're not going to. It's, I hate this term, but it's got to be a grassroots kind of thing.
Yeah.
Legacy media, corporate media, whatever the hell you want to call them, aren't worth the paper you could wrap them up in, because they offer no truth anywhere. And that goes for Fox and all the rest of them. They really offer no truth to anything that they're really saying. And I like you have had many of the guests that are on Fox. I've had them on my show as well, and it's interesting what they say on my show versus what little snippet pieces or whatever that you get on the cable news, and then obviously MSNBC and CNN and all the rest of them. They're really laughable in the way that they go about disseminating information. And I think I agree with you. I think it's going to be a grassroots kind of thing where it's going to be the conversations that you have with your friends while you're waiting to go into church, or coming out of church, or waiting at the what at the restaurant, having conversations with those, having conversations with your friends at football games or whatever. And, you know, and you kind of have to keep your wife from beating on you because, you're bringing up things that may upset people, kind of like the weird uncle at Thanksgiving kind of thing. But I agree with you. I think that's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and also too, it's like the thing that I keep reminding people is when you have these conversations, don't make it about the politician. Don't
Oh
make it
no.
about how they vote. Don't make it about anything. Make it about the worldview. Make it about your belief system. Leave the, it's kind of like
Right.
when you're preaching or giving a sermon or something like that, right? You want to teach the truth. You want to give some application. Here's how you take this verse and you apply it to your life and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of the application is actually your own interpretation of, okay, how does this apply to me in my specific situations, right? And I think that if we can change the worldview of people and their belief system, their voting will obviously morph and change over time. But if we make it about how they vote and who they support and which party and this and that, you're never going to get anywhere because and again, I live out here in communist California. Like, I'm never going to get my Democrat friends to vote Republican, but I could maybe get them to vote independent. I could
Yeah.
maybe get them to
Yeah.
trend in this particular way. And I think a perfect example of this was the recall election of Gavin Newsom last time around, where I had so many Democrat friends that were going to vote to recall him. But Larry Elder was running on the Republican side, and he was the leader on the Republican side. And they're like, well, I don't want him because they saw him as the representation of Donald
Right.
Trump. And they're like, we don't want Trump to be leading California. So they would rather keep Gavin Newsom in
Yeah.
than vote for Larry Elder. However, if we ran an independent, we could have maybe
Yeah.
gained some ground there.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, I don't discuss anything in terms of Democrat and Republican anymore. Like I said at the beginning, it needs to shift to biblical, and it's binary. It's either good or it's evil. And it to me it has boiled down, it is simple as that. And both parties are as suspect in my mind as the next. And I hearken back to, I was reading some Jerry Spence stuff the other day about his reformulation of the government, and I almost have to agree with him that it needs to be completely changed and reformulated to where we turn over X amount of people in the government and we don't have people in there until they're 95 years old. And um, anyway, anyway, but I agree. I think the conversation needs to basically, carry itself forward. And if you don't include, the Democrat and the Republican moniker on stuff, I think people would probably be a little bit more receptive because, like you said, they've got to, they did not grow up independently. They grew up identifying with a party, a Hollywood person, or whatever it was. They didn't grow up with an independent view of who they were or who they are, right?
Mhm.
They associate it with who somebody else is. And that in itself is a problem, but it's part of the whole issue. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's been terrific talking to you.
Yeah.
We've
Been
been
great.
we've been talking to Jeff Dornick, when's the book coming out?
I'm hoping I can have it done by the end of the year.
Okay. And the book is called Following the Leader. And your show, your social media, so people know where to go pick.
Yeah, definitely. So I do my show live on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 o'clock Eastern. You guys can watch it on Rumble. I've got Dinesh D'Souza is going to be coming on the show here soon. We're going to discuss and debate Tucker Carlson and all the craziness that's going on there. But I've had a whole bunch of amazing guests on the show. You guys can check out, like Dr. Bowden was just on my show and all that kind of stuff. But Tuesdays and Thursdays on Rumble, just look up the Jeff Dornick Show. But the best place to find me, honestly, is my social media platform, which is Pickaxe. Just go to pickaxe.com. You guys can sign up, and there's already some amazing people that are on there as well, like Children's Health Defense, Vigilant Fox, Dr. Bowden, people like that. But if you guys follow me, you guys can also subscribe to my email newsletter directly there through Pickaxe. So I've completely switched over from Substack over to Pickaxe. So that's where I do all of my emails and newsletters and all that kind of stuff now too. So best place is pickaxe.com.
Great. Well, again, it's been terrific, Jeff, and I'd like to have you back on at some point in the not too distant future.
Let's make it happen.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to listen to more Clarity from Chaos shows on demand, go to clarityfromchaos.buzzsprout.com or send Dave an email at info@clarityfromchaos.com for information on previous shows. You can also listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Twitter, or Google Podcast. Until next time, please remember, it's not about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. Be well, everyone.